Welcome to Enemies from War to Wisdom. Why do we need enemies? From intimate relationships to politics, tribalism, and community, we cannot seem to stop dehumanizing each other. Chronic conflicts in our families, societies, and nations seem inevitable. In this podcast, we analyze human hostilities from the most mundane to the most sophisticated. We apply psychology, psychoanalysis, art, spirituality, and relational theory in conversation about belonging and otherness. Each program will reach for a fresh wisdom that shows us how to step back from creating enemies in our lives. I'm your host, Eleanor Johnson, a videographer and artist with Emma Troupe, an experimental theater group in New York City, and I am here with my co-host, Polly Young-Eisendrath, who is a psychologist, Jungian analyst, author, and speaker. We approach our ideas each from our own worlds, but always from the spirit and teaching of Buddhism, of which we are lifelong practitioners. The title of today's podcast is, What About Mothers and Daughters? Why is it so hard? In the arena of entangled and often painful human relationships, the mother-daughter relationship may be paramount. If you think about it for a moment, you realize that every woman on earth has been inside of another woman and then comes out and has to differentiate or at least grow apart from that original home. Women are far too often alienated from within themselves, divided against themselves, their bodies, and each other. Without blame, we may need to see that the mother-daughter bond has to be clarified by women in order to stop the alienation from ourselves and other women, and to explore our own conflicts and power dynamics in order for us to move ahead as self-confident women. In today's podcast, Polly and I are joined again by Polly's daughter, Amber Rickert, who's in Vermont from LA. And we'll be speaking together about this complex and often too avoided conversation about how mothers and daughters affect each other over the generations. So it's really precious to have Polly and Amber here together, mother and daughter. And so we will begin by saying a little bit about Amber. And Polly, why don't we have you introduce Amber?
So Amber Rickert is my grown-up daughter, and she is a clinical social worker and the director of outpatient services at a mental health clinic in South Los Angeles. She has a master's in clinical social work and a master's in public health. I'll add a little plug because this is a show about mothers and daughters. I'm very proud of Amber and her work, admire the work that she does. And she and I are in somewhat similar fields, but not exactly, which has been actually kind of wonderful because it's like she developed her own thing a little bit away from my thing, but not too far away, so that I can truly appreciate the work you do. And it would have been difficult had you become, let's say, a subatomic physicist or something.
I'm sure you would have talked about that too.
Well, but I probably wouldn't have understood your work so well. Yeah. Like your brother, I don't really understand the work that your brother does in data analysis. So I'm really, really happy to have you with us. And you are in an earlier podcast as well. So.
And Amber's also a mother. She has a wonderful young son, Clive. And I don't have children, but I'm a universal mother. I'm a big mother, but the world's my
But you were a daughter also.
I was a daughter, yes, and I am a woman.
Right. And I was a daughter, I'm a mother, and I'm a mother to a daughter and a son. And then, of course, I'm a mother also to stepchildren.
But, one of the things I'd like to do, if I may, is just a quote that I use in my own work is from Jung, and we have a Jungian here with us, Polly, and from the aspects of the feminine, which I've always found so poetic and meaningful. And Jung writes, every mother contains her daughter in herself, and every daughter her mother, and every mother extends backwards into her mother and forwards into her daughter. And I just think that's a very powerful statement, and that's from Jung. That these are Jung speaking in aspects of the feminine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it always, I'm happy to hear Jung say many things because I often do like what he says, but I'm also always a little taken back when men write about being mothers. At the very beginning, I accepted that when Winnicott and Freud and Jung and all were writing about being mothers. I truly didn't give it a second thought. Then I think once I became a mother, particularly when my children were young, and I was teaching this material when I was teaching at Bryn Mawr, I began to get like a little antsy at a lot of men talking about being mothers, because I thought they probably have never done a whole weekend with young children,
Well, they
and had
define
that
everything.
feeling. Yeah, I mean, it's like they were describing things as outsiders, and it makes sense to do that. But on the other hand, they sort of got there to tell the story before the women actually got to tell the story themselves. So that I like the quote, and I think it's meaningful, and I think he's accurate. But also, he wasn't a mother.
Step off, you.
Right, he wasn't a mother. So, yeah.
Well, it was like I used to say that about Bergman. Bergman was like the quintessential authority on women's emotions and women's sexuality and all of that kind of stuff. And you thought, wait a minute,
You're not a woman.
Yeah, you're not a woman, and we have a very different way of looking at it. And as an artist, I've always been aware that my aesthetics are different from the men that have been my teachers and my mentors. And not that I don't appreciate all that I've learned from them, but it's different.
So I'd like to start by asking Amber, like what you think of this topic or how you come to it, because I know you and I have talked about writing a book together, and we together read the book I'm Supposed to Save You from All That, which...
Yep. We've traveled together.
Yeah.
It's funny, yesterday Clive was saying to me in the car on the way home.
Clive being your son.
Yeah, Eleanor mentioned that I have a son named Clive.
Yes.
Clive mentioned to me in the car that he's like, it's really funny with you and Grandma, because one moment you guys are having the best time, and the next moment you're like shooting her a glance across the table. And I think that pretty much sums up the mother-daughter relationship, at least ours. I mean, I know that there are many other kinds, but we're also both really big personalities, and we're kind of, when we're together, we're kind of like orbiting each other, and both have a lot of strong opinions on, the nature of reality, say, or spiritual devotion and spiritual practice. And this family that we're in together has never been submissive group of people. So, I can't say that our mother-daughter relationship specifically is like everybody else's, but I think there can be a kind of healthy, it can be unhealthy, but it can also be healthy, and it can generate like wonderful ideas. Like there's a little bit of a sort of competitiveness, I'd say, around like who knows what and how much we might know about certain things.
Well, you grew up with Polly.
Yeah, and being a child, that was
Right.
much harder for me, I would say, because children are kind of trying to like figure out their own realities, and you want to when you're a kid, you want to kind of explore, and you're very curious. But as a grown-up, it's been kind of really, like, I always have a lot of fun when we're together. And I think it's also been really important for me to kind of figure out my own place. And it's a lot of people ask me or say to me, oh, you're a therapist too. Isn't that interesting? And I always say, well, yeah, I'm sure it is interesting. But it kind of makes sense. And also I do practice really differently than you because I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I also use a lot of psychoanalytic principles in my work, and it certainly informs, it's like part of my early experience, obviously being the child of a psychoanalyst. I'm sure that I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for my relationship with you. And at the same time, it's always been really important to me to differentiate myself from you, from my background. I've traveled all over the world, and I think all those experiences were really important for me to have. And now, finally, almost half a century later, I feel like I could really enjoy and embrace sort of coming back to a place that you would call home, and that's Vermont in this case. I don't think I ever could picture myself really being happy or satisfied in a place like Vermont, which is where you've been for so long, even though I love it here. But now I can. Mm-hmm. And so it's like there's a bit of a completion of a really big cycle, I think, for me.
So your journey of differentiation. from your place of origin.
Well, and I think she's pointed out several themes that I would say are typical of all mothers and daughters. One, I think, is competition. I actually do think it's universal.
Yeah.
And I also think that idea that, this person that you're coming from is also a woman. I mean, having a son is different because you know that this is going to be a different person. But as a mother of a daughter, I feel like it was different than being a daughter of a mother. That, it's like when I had a daughter at the beginning, I thought, this is a better version of me. I mean, it was like this person, the way I look at her like she's like me, but better. But when I looked at my mother, it was like just the opposite. It was like, woo, I'm not anything really like her. It was
and I don't have a daughter, so I've often thought, wow, like if I had a daughter, that person would probably be so much more like me. Right. Because Clive is not like me at all.
Right. Yeah, you kind of like cancel out the sons because you just sort of think at the beginning. And they also, it's true that boys do have to separate and differentiate pretty quickly or they will be miserable. They have to do that. But the daughter doesn't really have to quickly. And then it depends a lot on the mother's emotional needs, I think. Because in seeing mothers and daughters in therapy, and I see them sometimes in dialogue therapy, as well as I see, of course, I see mostly women in therapy and always have. And they're always a daughter. So they've always had a mother. So we always hear about the mother.
It's pretty inevitable.
Yes. And the mother always figures in a major way in people's therapy. And generally speaking, I'd say 99.9% of the time, there's a lot of complaining about the mother, not so much about the father. And then, if that mother that I see in therapy, or that woman I see in therapy also has a daughter, almost always that mother with a grown daughter feels sad that her daughter doesn't love her more. I mean, so they're like these themes that occur, I think, kind of universally. So I think there's a reason to talk about them because it doesn't matter. I see people in therapy from Asia, from South America. I've seen them certainly, all over in North America, different ethnicities, races, religions. This theme about mother-daughter is pretty universal. And it's pretty much like there's a kind of negative look back at the mother if you're the daughter.
Well, you also
and
have...
then there's the mother wanting the daughter, her own daughter, to love her more.
And you've got at a meta level women hating.
Well, I think that is another... I mean, that's another topic which is important.
Yeah, but it also plays into the life of a mother and a daughter.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah, and I mean, Karen Horney, the psychoanalyst Karen Horney, said everybody has fear and dread of a woman.
That's right.
Because everybody had a mother, and the mother was in charge of your life for at least a couple of years. And for most people, it's a lot of years. It's not just, like if you're in a tribe somewhere in Thailand, like when we went to the hill tribes, some of those kids were pretty independent at 3 years old. But in North America, you're going to be like 25 or so. And all that time, it seems like your mother is holding the reins more than your father.
I mean, I don't know if this is not maybe a psychological term, but you have the internalization of all of this.
Yeah, exactly.
So you might not, again, like when we were talking about, scientific models and consciousness and all of that things that we just don't even know we're carrying.
Exactly. And so then a lot of women feel alienated from themselves.
Yes.
They feel like somehow that they're not confident about what they know. Yeah. Or they don't feel confident in their bodies, or they feel like somehow defective or less than.
Right.
And that was my mother. My mother had 6 daughters and 1 son, but she would have preferred to have that reversed and have 6 sons and 1 daughter. But she projected all of her negativity about women
into the daughters.
As an inferior race, in a sense, to all her daughters.
Yeah.
And we're all very Amazonian because we just fought that in her. But it was, so we had to carry the burden of that shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Grandma, your mom, was a little bit like that too. She idealized men.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly,
Yeah, well, it was some more, I think she was really, really hurt by having to leave school at 13. mean, she practically said it to me many, many times. She loved to read and she liked to write, and she felt like that was cut off for her. But she wouldn't go back and take a GED or go to high school
because
she was too
proud.
Embarrassed. Yeah, she wouldn't do it as an adult. So she had this desire to be educated, and then I got very educated, and so did you. And then she was very competitive with that. She was very good, but she thought we were always putting her down when we weren't, because she was so sensitive to us knowing words she didn't know.
Well, I think that also does happen generally with people who, you're trying to share an idea or talk about something, and if they don't quite understand it, or like what we were talking about in the last podcast, like not everybody gets that reality is subjective. And so people can feel like you're talking down to them.
Right.
If you're trying to explain this thing, right?
Yeah.
That's an easy thing for people to feel.
And then people call it mansplaining.
Yeah.
But actually, it's kind of like mothersplaining, too.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want your mother to explain to you what things are like. Starting, at a pretty young age. I mean, I was happy with my mother explaining things to me until I was about 12. And then I was like, you hardly know anything. And actually, because my parents didn't have an education, it was kind of true.
Did. Yeah,
yes, it was kind of true. By the time I was in the 8th grade, I was like, these people hardly know anything. And that was, I'm sure, terribly humiliating to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also we could get into what, like, our education system and whether that really is knowledge also. That's a whole, like, I feel like my degrees, I learned so much at Columbia when I was there, but a lot of what I do now, I've had to unlearn some of that stuff.
Sure.
So, and I've heard other people, scholars from Harvard, talk about
I found that too
that
after
experience.
Years and years of higher education. When I walked away from my PhD, because I reached a limit and I just felt I had no use for it, because I didn't want to be an academic, and I was wanting to be the artist that I am. But I then spent the next 10 years undoing everything I had learned to find out my own kind of vibratory signature, my way of doing things, and also separating out from all the men, because I had only men as my mentors and teachers. There were no women directors in my field when I was in my early years. So that was a really interesting process, a very exciting and liberating one as well. And very proud of myself that I had the determination to do that. I had nobody giving me permission to do that. That was my own personal journey.
What's kind of interesting that the three of us, I think, do have a strong individual signature.
Yeah.
Like, nobody has ever given me permission to do anything, but I never really ask either.
No, you do. You do not.
I do
you
not
just
ask.
do.
I just do what I need to do.
Yeah.
But my parents were so... it's like, again, I think it depends a little bit. I think you had a similar kind of background, but your father was actually pretty well educated and also pretty much of an authority. Neither of my parents were, so I just took it upon myself really early to just do what I needed to do. My mother, I think, felt insulted by that. I think she wanted to be the authority.
Well, I think she felt abandoned, too.
Yeah, she felt abandoned, too.
That's
She wanted to be the authority.
Yeah.
She must have felt abandoned.
Yeah, I felt
on a really deep level with a child so unfamiliar to her.
Yeah. I mean, I think she felt abandoned, and I think she felt really, really hurt. I have felt, retrospectively, I felt for her hurt and her woundedness. She was the 5th of 10 children in a family that had 12. And I think she was overlooked. I mean, she never said that because there wasn't a language that she had to talk about that. But she acted that way. She acted like she was being overlooked all the time.
And my mother came from 11.
From
11 children. Yeah. Interesting, very
similar.
Too. Not educated, pulled out of school at fourth grade, and was so honored and mystified by higher education and all of that. Wanted to be a school teacher. Just had dreams of the world and stuff. And of course, that was never her life. But she wasn't bitter or anything. But she had tremendous respect for an educated person. That was nice. I'm the only one in my family that went on to higher education, and I had to create my own funding, which I continue doing.
Yeah. Well, there's this real gift with higher education, and I've always seen it as that. Yeah. But I also see it that, like, We were behind a guy cutting grass on the way back here today, and I was like, I'm ready to go do that. I mean, I know that's a fantasy too, but I'm like, if I could just cut someone's grass all day long, I would feel really satisfied.
And also the educational, I mean, the world that for all of us, I mean, that we shared is not the world that, the young children are going to have access to. It's a different world. Education isn't what it once was.
Well, I guess
definitely changing.
It's really a problem right now at this particular moment that children are not allowed to be in school together.
Right.
But again, not to go too far afield into that, I hope that changes. The issue of trying to kind of focus on mothers and daughters and how women come to feel disenfranchised in themselves, and how that in my lifetime and in yours too, Eleanor, and to some extent even in Amber's, because Amber, when I was pregnant with Amber, I read Adrienne Rich's book of Woman Born.
Oh, right.
And I read that book because this is still unbelievable to me when I think sometimes of my life. So I was in North Carolina, and Amber's father, who's my first husband, was teaching in Bennett College, and I was working at A&T State University. Those are black colleges, black university. And I heard Shirley Chisholm, she was running for president. I heard her give a speech at Bennett College. It was an incredible speech in which she talked about the oppression of women as well as the oppression of African Americans. And up until that point, I had not believed that women were oppressed. I mean, weirdly, I thought that it was a middle class, kind of the complaint of middle class women, like people like Betty Friedan. I thought, who cares about Betty Friedan? I mean, it wasn't appealing to me because I was a radical, and I was a radical in the kind of Black Power movement. Like I fashioned myself as like, at that point, like I was a kind of, I suppose, like a social justice warrior. I don't know. I thought I was a radical anyway.
There's echoes there.
Well, I never really, behaved like a radical. It's so funny.
There's echoes over here too.
I mean, I lived it. We lived in an African American community, working in African American places, but we were also. It's sort of like we were protected. Everything was kind of very.
Well, it's idyllic in its own way.
Yeah, it was, because we were like in a community of people. It was very sort of, academic. It was civilized or whatever. Anyway, in the middle of that comes Shirley Chisholm, and I think, oh my gosh, I'm a woman. Maybe I should pay attention to this women's movement. So I read Of Woman Born, my first book. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a hugely powerful book about being a mother. It's not really about the women's movement as much as it is about the delusion of motherhood.
A lot of those great women brought that into focus, yes.
Well, it was powerful. Yeah. And I was like, yes, I see this now. Motherhood is made up. The whole institution is made up. And all you get is your experience of being a mother. And so I'm just going for the experience. I don't care about the institution. And so that's how I'm coming into her life. Yeah. It's like, she's inside of me. And then, I'm also a vegetarian. I'm not following a whole lot of directions. And then I have this 10-pound baby, natural childbirth in North Carolina with this old gynecologist, this old man who'd never heard of natural childbirth. The whole thing was like a train wreck in a certain way, but it worked really well in another way. So I get this incredible baby that I feel like, I'm doing this my way. It's going to be exactly somehow like my experience. And her father, I sort of thought, well, he's there. He's okay. He's not going to make a problem for the two of us. But that was the way I started. I started definitely like, it's she and I, and we're doing this together. I'm going to figure out, I had this idea, I don't know who she is. I'm going to meet her. I'm not going to have this, But of course, then I start meeting her and I'm thinking, oh, she's so smart. She's going to do this. She's going to do that. And of course, it's entirely my projection. This is like a really smart baby. And the baby is so beautiful. And the baby is doing this and the baby is doing that. And, her father's having to make a living. I off and on. I only really stayed at home 2 years without working at all. But I guess for me, there was like this adventure in having my first baby. And for you, it's your life. And for me, I'm trying to become like a feminist at this time. I'm trying to, not do the motherhood like somebody's convention of motherhood. I'm not going to do the birthday parties the way you're supposed
leave it
to
to Beaver.
Yeah, it was like I wasn't even going to try for any of that.
Yeah,
and
I
don't know what it was like for you.
Yeah, I didn't actually read. I read a lot of childbirth books and like books about the baby's development. Like I always wanted to know those things, but I swear to God, I probably haven't read one parenting book. And if I had, I didn't finish them because I just felt like I don't want someone else to tell me how to be as a parent or as a mother. Like I know on some level how to do this intuitively, and I don't need to read a parenting book.
Well, that's because you had me.
Yes, you told me all of what to do, and I just did it in lockstep.
But I wonder what it was like for you as a daughter with the mother who is like, I know at the beginning, I think you were disappointed that I wasn't more conventional. I mean, I think there were
of course, times that I wanted those things. My Sherwin, who's my partner now, will say like, "Oh, look at all these ways in which you've turned out like your mother, or that your mother has influenced your life, or and you guys have spent a lot of time together too." So he has like a very deep respect for you, and it's true. But I also don't feel like there's a lot of ways where I don't feel like I'm like you at all.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. I mean, that's healthy. We really shouldn't want to have facsimiles of ourselves.
No,
that is
I
just
agree.
not healthy.
Right.
I don't think that it would be healthy for the planet either if we just had sort of clones of ourselves walking around. Sometimes kids turn out to be a lot like their parents and sometimes they don't. But for me, I just always felt like I kind of knew how I wanted to be as a mother very early on an intuitive level. That isn't to say that I didn't need support, various forms of support when Clive was a little baby, like on how to do certain things, but not how to be a mother to him. And of course, then I also went through a divorce when Clive was really little. So that also threw my motherhood experience into a kind of survival mode as well. Like I didn't have a whole lot of luxury to sit around and think about it. I just kind of had to do it.
But I wonder sometimes if my divorce also from your father influenced your divorce. I mean, it was like,
not consciously.
Right, but it's like, I felt like, as a mother, I tumbled through those early years because I was trying to figure out who I was, who the baby was, and then I had another baby not too long after that. But it was like, I did not want to play by the playbook, but I also didn't want to do a disaster. So I wasn't
trying to do it exactly like you did. I would not recommend a divorce when your child is really young. It's not recommended. But I also did have a tremendous adventure. I mean, both when my son was with his dad and when I've been with my son. And because I only had one kid, we do have like a kind of adventurous life together. And very early on, when I was not doing very well at all with depression and...
You mean as in your adult life?
In my adult life, very early on in his life. He was quite young and I did not feel like I was going to be able to do it all, living in LA and living so far away from everyone. But I made a conscious decision at some point in my mind. I think I was looking at myself in the mirror and I was like, I will not allow my child's life to be dictated by my unhappiness. And I am going to make this into an adventure. And that's what I did. Sometime he was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I was just like, we're going to have an adventure from now on. And that's kind of how I've approached everything. And it's helped during this period of time, too, when the world has been so fearful. To have that outlook on life has really helped me. And he's a lot more cautious than I am, but he also kind of follows my lead.
Again, to try to bring this back to the mother-daughter thing, I think you and I now, and I think this is true from what I see of Eleanor too, we're all kind of in a good space in regard to mothers and mother-daughter stuff now. I don't think that was true in the early part of my life. Right. I don't think it was true in the early part of your life. And, it's like what I see from women in therapy is there's a period of time when they actually have to grapple with who their mother was. I think it's a good idea even to know something about your mother's life, like how did she grow up and what were her circumstances, because many times younger women blame their mothers for things, but they don't understand them in a context of what was that woman's life like, how did she grow up. And then, though, to be able to see that life that was your mother's life and see that you had a different childhood than she had, and you have the chance of becoming an individual, but to be able to see somehow, as you said, that, if you think about it like this way, like why did you crash into her crown chakra? Why did you come crashing into this woman? I mean, there was something there that you learned also from being born of this woman and being born as a woman. It's like being born as a woman, you have more echoes of your mother than if you're born as a son. I truly believe that it's not just, let's say, the fact that you also have the whole
chromosomes.
You have the chromosomes and the reproductive system. I mean, when men talk about being mothers, I just think you try having a period every month. Or, when they talk about wanting to become women, I mean, I know there's a lot of criticism of, say, J.K. Rowling, because she said, to be a woman is actually, there's a hormonal constraint there.
Yeah.
And if you think that it's just all about painting your fingernails or, having long hair or something, I mean, try having, I had endometriosis and so I had really painful periods. I mean, try having that for lots of years of your life.
Well, I think that's an unhealed wound for a lot of women.
You mean that the hormonal?
Well, and I don't think feminism in the 70s really did address all of the ways in which women are oppressed still and have been oppressed.
Yeah.
And so when you get the intersection of LGBTQI plus issues with women who particularly were feminists in the 70s, I think as time has gone on, there's been a lot of intersectionality in all of these movements, but to use some of the lingo, but I think there is a lot of stuff that's still unhealed in women. And so
yes, I agree.
Well, I
the
think
fact that we can't talk about it without sort of, again, being essentialized and called a name makes it complicated. But if we could sit down and talk about why some women do have a really strong reaction to somebody wanting to be a woman, they're not what I would say a TERF. I would say they're actually still trying to work through something in themselves.
Do you know
feel
what TERF is?
Protective.
Do you know TERF? Because why don't we say what TERF is?
I don't know what it stands for.
It's
I can't remember.
What does it stand for?
They're prejudiced against particularly a transgendered woman. So men who are women, who want to be a woman, there's a feeling amongst women who are born women biologically that it's like, hey, this is my territory here.
Another boundary.
It's a boundary, right? And why do you want in on my world when, it's so complicated, I do feel like there's just a lot that's unhealed, that hasn't been healed yet.
I agree with you.
And so,
from the cisgendered
to
women
call
who
a
were
woman a
feminists in the
TERF right
70s,
away isn't to understand what women really go through and have been through on a daily basis. And it isn't like women wouldn't want for people to be included in their group, but it's like there's this thing that still hasn't really been healed.
I'd just like to share that, in my life, and when I came back from university in England in 1969, and I was aware of the women's movement in the United States, and I knew the history of suffragettes and so on and so forth, and I've always been woman identified. But I found it was just an extraordinary, maybe 2 decades of just this awakening that came when women of all different walks of life came together and started to talk with one another, and then all the books. And I had the privilege in my laboratory of all the great mothers, as I call them, that came into my work, and where we looked at what it meant to to work as women and to also understand mothering and daughtering and all of that, but just all the different levels of that, the dimensionality of that, and sexuality and all kinds of things, but we were able to be together, sitting together, huge groups of women, known and unknown, all the different levels, but we could be together and we could talk and share, and books changed our lives, and people were doing
I think
speak
that would
outs
be able
and
to change if
that
we
was,
had that kind of opportunity.
I know, and that went
now.
on for a full decade, and then it started, separating and fracturing and all of that. And then, I would sit in rooms where I had, all of the famous women, and they all disagreed, but they agreed to disagree.
Right.
And, and they had their prejudice and stuff, and it was really dynamic, and it was frustrating and stuff, but it was a very extraordinary time.
Well, I think that was a kind of wonderful period to be in a city.
Yes, well, I was in the city.
You were in New York at that time, and to be around women who were really questioning.
Yeah.
There is something, though, that was left, as Amber was saying, as a wound from that period.
Yes, the wounds were,
Because when I see women in therapy now who are my age mates, and I see a lot of them who are baby boomers, and even if they went through a feminist awakening in the 1970s, 1980s, there was something that was left out. And I think it was around being a mother and what it meant, because there was a sort of rejection of being a mother. I know when I had my children, none of my friends had children because they were sort of not identifying with being mothers. They didn't want to be mothers. And then right at the end of their 30s, they were like, whoops, I think I'd like to do that now. And then became mothers later. But that's
true. It's that generation where they started having...
Where they started doing their babies later and later and later.
Yes.
And now that's true still. If I'll see young women...
Yeah. And outside of marriage, not necessarily having to get married to do.
Nobody really says they have to be married.
Yeah.
But women in their 30s wanting to delay until their career is solid to become a mother. But again, just kind of getting back to the mother-daughter dynamic, I think some of what that was left out of feminism early, from my point of view, there was a lot of conversation about men. There was a lot of conversation about patriarchy. There was a lot of conversation about rape and about various kinds of sex crimes against women, all of which were important conversations.
All stages.
Yeah,
stages
a lot
of
of and a lot of it. But then there's this one thing that really didn't get talked about a lot, which is that all of us have mothers. And that mothers actually have this echo of being female. They were also born of mothers. And so there's this kind of echo chamber of mothers and daughters and mothers and daughters that hasn't really been talked about. And some of that, I think, still does affect women's relationships with each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, the one thing that I see I'm in almost all of the organizations that I've been in leadership are all female organizations. Maybe, all the psychoanalytic groups. When I say all female, I mean, it's such a majority of female that you might have 40 people in the room and there are 2 men. Yeah. So there might be men in there, but they're not leading and they're not in the central kind of group. So in my life as a teacher, a leader, a Buddhist, a mindfulness teacher, psychoanalyst, and then the people that I see in therapy. For 10 years, I saw only women, and now I see men and women. But I have been in a female majority life. And what I have seen is that it isn't primarily men who are oppressing women. And I'm not even sure that in the generations that I tend to see in therapy, which include, women now who are in their 30s. I don't see anybody in their 20s, but I don't really think the oppressive forces have been men. They've tended to be other women. And it's been very difficult for women to deal with their bosses or their colleagues.
I think it's reinforced
who are other women.
By women. I mean, I mostly have had very good sort of professional relationships with men. Again, there are not a lot of men in my field.
Right.
But I have certainly dealt with men who don't completely know what to do about strong, sort of outspoken woman. And I've been told many times, you're really intense. You should smile more.
Yeah.
By men. And it's just like, okay, I mean, I'm not going to like make a post about it on social media.
Right.
But it does irritate me. I also think there's one other thing here, which like I didn't think the Me Too movement really did that much, but there is this thing, and sure, anyone can be raped, but usually women get raped more than men do.
Well, yes.
And
I mean, boys can be raped.
Yeah, boys can be raped too. But there is that other layer too. Like I had someone in my yard a couple weeks ago while I was working online, and it was a man. He was just walked into my yard. He got in through an open gate. And so I had to figure out how to get him out non-violently, obviously. But there is that feeling when you're in a situation like that of he could do something to me. And sure, anybody can be attacked. A man can be attacked
right,
too.
But you saw him as an aggressor more than you would see a woman.
A woman
as
does
an
have that fear that's sort of primal,
Yeah,
right?
The demand
and
is...
so we're constantly, there is that feeling, it's sort of invisible labor that women are having to do to de-escalate situations.
Yeah.
So I would just say that's a layer that's in there too.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on that. And I agree with you that I also think that I was born into a patriarchal culture, and it didn't have that terminology associated with it. That was the terminology. But I think all of that has been actually articulated and pretty well thought about. It's the woman-to-woman relationship where there's power associated that I feel has been under-analyzed or recognized, and that when women are in particularly leadership positions in all female or majority female organizations, the mother-daughter dynamic comes in quickly. And the dynamic is kind of around envy, that somebody else is getting more cookies than you're getting, or somebody else is getting more kudos. And also envy, and also self-protection and self-promotion. Like, I'm going to talk about you behind your back. I'm not going to go to you and say directly, I have a disagreement with you and I'd like to talk it out. Instead, I'm going to go to my friend, who's also a woman. This is in an all-woman environment. And I'm going to say, do you know what Eleanor was doing? Did you see her at that meeting? What do you think she was about? And instead of going
it's all
directly
kind of under the guise of processing too.
Right.
But really there's more of an undercurrent of maliciousness in it.
Yes, and that's why that sister to sister thing can be so hard for women. It's like I've seen so many women who feel so abandoned by their friends in a work setting where they feel their friend hasn't supported them or hasn't supported them in the right way, but they have never gone to the friend and talked about it and worked through it. So it's that issue of being able to have conflict with women in a female organization, and to be able to do that in a way that you're not afraid to be yourself and to hear the other person. I think there are barriers that are left from the mother-daughter.
And it may be also that we are the ones who will bring the next wave, be able to articulate the next advanced dimension of understanding as women. With each other, yes. I mean, I had a psychologist who I respected who was a part of my life for a while, and he said about one of my funders who was with me for a long time, he said, this is the first time I've seen two women who are not mother-daughter. It's the only woman I ever knew that I didn't have that dynamic with.
Didn't have the mother dynamic.
Yeah, there was a mutuality between us, an ability to work together, and it was just extraordinary. And I always felt, she's not here, she's left this earth, but I just felt it was one of the greatest privileges of my life. Mm-hmm. And to be able to work where you also had, two professional women, and we had all the influences of the male world. Mm-hmm. And male power and all of that, but yet we were always functioning from a different reality. So, we're pioneering all of these new fronts now, and so maybe as women have a chance to know themselves better, daughters and mothers know themselves better, it helps the daughters know themselves better as well.
Well, and to see that the mother-daughter bond may be the one unexplored, it's sort of like the ocean.
It may be.
It's this one unexplored relationship that's so fundamental to our lives as women, because that is our same.
Right.
That's where we started.
Right.
And it's sort of it's like an ocean.
It'll free the masculine as well.
It's very deep. Yeah. That competitiveness or that envy can be undone in the mother-daughter relationship.
Yeah.
That it can be taught out and then unwound.
Yeah.
Right. And then that women wouldn't have this undermining of each other's power, this inability to somehow support each other's successes and power. That seems like that's been missing from women's groups and women's organizations.
And when it's there, it's extraordinary. It is there. It's not it's not
completely absent. But honestly, I hear about that in my therapy with women more than anything else.
Well, I would just like to say that in my life, I've had extraordinary support from women, and I've encountered those women who are more masculine than masculine, and who, who weren't supportive of other women. But on the whole, it's been extraordinary in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have too. So it's like a plug for those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, to know that also exists. But people have done the work. I mean, we've all done the work. It's not like.
Well, I mean, my mentors were all women through my graduate education and later. But my mentors were also older than me. I wasn't competitive with them. And I think that we had a kind of mother-daughter relationship. Mm-hmm. It was more when I got to organizations where I was working with equals, women who were equals, that I felt we would get into this envy and competition and then backbiting instead of being able to deal with our conflicts. And my feeling is that as mothers and daughters, can literally be able to talk to each other as equals and to see each other and have their conflicts also. That then maybe women can do that. And personally, I feel like all the women I have known have been very much women in my mind. I don't see them as masculine. I mean, even if they've been in positions of leadership, they're often doing so in a way that's quite different from what a man might be doing. But can they work with the conflict with other women? Can they actually support other women's prominence without in some way being competitive with it? That's kind of the issue.
That's a very important value in my own life. And I found, when I came back from university where, I had a very hard relationship with my mother, but then I was able to turn that, and my mother became, absolutely precious, and we talked about, everything, and we just had this great love. So I did succeed in doing that with my father as well. That's very, very, very important in my life, and realizing that the values that they gave me, even though they felt so distorted when I was growing up and I hated her and all this kind of stuff, all of that was transformed.
That's great.
And it was just that's one of the great successes of my life.
Well, I feel with my daughter also that all of the things
that sitting right here,
that we struggled with. I mean, I feel they have been transformed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not that we don't have our struggles still, or that we don't do our little dances, but they aren't done with. I think there's a lot
Some
of
humor. Them make me laugh.
Yeah, they are. There's a lot of humor.
Be like, you're a princess. No, you're the princess.
Right. Yes, that was the other day.
No, you can feel a beautiful bond between the two of you. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, so I've been really enjoyed doing this podcast with you, dear. I really do.
Yeah,
it's very special to have you here in Vermont.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to be here. What a gift to be here right now.
Right.
Yeah,
for me too,
really
being out of the cities. Yeah. Wow.
So I think this is. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. So yes, well, it's all like with everything we're talking about. It's step by step. It's all evolving. We're just greater and greater awareness, greater and greater appreciation. Mm-hmm. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening. And to continue the conversation, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find past episodes of the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and CastBox. Enemies from War to Wisdom is recorded and produced by Chris Coltrane.